All right, thank you, Mr. Nazarian. You have you are the last thing between, well, no, this is our final request. And
Between all of us and everywhere else we need to be.
yes.
All right.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Today I'm presenting an audit that inspects how the 10 campuses of the UCs and the UC Office of the President deal with the settlements of sexual harassment cases. As an alumnus of UCLA myself and a longtime supporter of the UCs, you can imagine what a difficult decision this has been. And so this audit has been in the making for well over a year and a half at this point. Unfortunately, sexual harassment have plagued universities and college campuses across the country. However, what my constituent brought to light is just as alarming. After standing up to her harasser, going through the correct channels to reach justice, and establish that she had been harassed, she was met with further consternation from the administration. In the agreement reached, the university included a provision barring her from attending or working not only at her home institution, but from all 10 UC campuses. This created a situation where the campus not only allowed for her to be harassed, but further hurt her for coming forward and reporting the sexual harassment. It is imperative to audit and see if this is a common practice, common practice among any state agency to re-victimize those they have allowed to be a victim to begin with. With me, I have Sarah, who courageously stepped forward to share her story.
Hello.
Thank you, ma'am. And before you proceed, I respectfully ask that you try to limit your comments to 2 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I would like to thank the committee members for taking the time to listen and learn about my story. I was a victim of sexual harassment by my PhD mentor at UCLA. When I spoke up, I was further punished and retaliated against by the UC system, or the UC lawyers. I suffered through a horrible and very painful Title IX investigation that was combative and unsupportive, which led to a forced mediation where I was further punished, barring me from ever taking a class at a UC school or even extension or finishing my PhD or working in the UC system or any affiliates, so even like a hospital that is affiliated with the UC system. I suffered physical and mental illness from the stress of being sexually harassed by my mentor in a very difficult and demanding PhD program. I've also suffered financially. The loans I took out in hopes of finishing my PhD are still collecting interest. The money I had to spend on doctors, psychiatrists to help me deal with the PTSD that I still am suffering from, in the end, kind of can make you feel hopeless quite often. And now I come before you because there may be others out there who have suffered the same fate as me, but they remain silent because the mental stress and toll can be extremely overwhelming. Let me explain a little bit about the process I went through or had to go through to stop my professor from harassing me. That way you're aware of what happens once you start the complaint process. The internal process of speaking to the Title IX officer is nearly impossible, both time-wise, while you're completing a PhD, and you don't feel safety or justice or protection as you're supposed to. And it's the Title IX officer, and Title IX is specifically funded to protect the victim and make sure the process is fair. Instead, the Title IX process became and does become terrifying. Your whole department community learns of the case while it's ongoing. And you can imagine certain professors have certain alliances. So it's crippling your academic ability to move forward or feel comfortable in the environment where you're supposed to be learning and to be a student. The Title IX investigation, the initial part, found the professor guilty of inappropriate behavior, yet that is just the first step. After taking so much time already.
Ma'am, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
Okay.
we appreciate you coming forward, your courage to share your personal experience. You will have an opportunity to more fully express, but we, in the interest of moving the committee's business forward, going to ask you to wrap up.
Okay. I would like to just say that I don't want anyone ever to go through what I went through. It's not fair. That's not what you signed up for. I don't understand how people can protect and not in any way punish professors who are continuously doing this, continually getting away with it, while students suffer in silence if they have the courage to come up and try and find justice in a system that's supposed to provide justice.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I should have told you I kept my comments to minimum so that I defer more time to Sarah.
Just want to be fair to all of our
Sure.
presenters, and so I appreciate your cooperation. State Auditor, Ms. Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, very quickly, what Mr. Nazarian is asking us to do is looking at the university system as a whole, all 10 campuses, as well as the Office of the President, looking at policies and procedures related to sexual harassment, and comparing those to best practices and determining whether or not there are, how long, if there has been a policy to include provisions and settlements barring students from either attending or working at the university, how long has that been in place? Also looking at best practices in other states, determining whether or not California law and university policy really emulates best practices. And then he's asking us to look at a 10-year window, try to identify the number of complaints over those 10 years, break it down by campus, if there are situations that have occurred at the Office of the President. So trying to break that down geographically, essentially, the 10 campuses plus UCOP. Looking at those complaints from a timeliness perspective, similar to what we did, we audited sexual harassment, sexual violence under Title IX a few years ago. That was specifically looking at training, outreach, et cetera. This audit is looking at the complaints process at each of the universities. Again, for those complaints that we identify, determining how many of those have actually been substantiated, and with that smaller sample, looking at the discipline that was administered and how consistently has that discipline been administered based on the facts of the particular cases and circumstances. Again, asking us to determine for those settlements, did they include these prohibitions from either attending the university or working at the university, or any other, in Mr. Nazarian's terms, punitive, any other adverse impact within that particular settlement. And then the last objective, really looking at some information with respect to the alleged harassers. Are they faculty members? Are they members of executive management? Are they in the senior management group? So somewhat demographic information. But then also when you're looking at faculty or management, he's also asking us to determine whether or not, if it's a faculty member, how many publications that has that individual been involved in as far as research, what other relationships that individual has with that institution or other institutions. Has that person, the alleged harasser, again, had a key role in fundraising for the university. So really trying to get at the persona of the particular individuals at the various campuses who are these alleged harassers, and particularly for those that were substantiated. I think those are the most important ones that he's asking us to look for. The budget for this audit is 3,700 hours, a little over 3,700. Take us about 9 months to complete, and the reason for that is, again, 10 campuses plus the Office of the President. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd answer any questions members may have. Thank you.
Right. Before we go into questions, I want to give an opportunity for the University of California to respond, and then we'll open it up to committee questions.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, and thank you very much for providing this opportunity to speak with you today. I would first like to start by stating that I admire greatly the constituent who came forward today, and the fact that she came forward in the past to address this concern. I do think, we do think that it's a very brave thing to do, and unequivocally, what happened to you was absolutely wrong. That is not something that I contend with respect to sexual harassment. And I also appreciate that there's acknowledgement that the university is working to make changes. We acknowledge that there needs to be more improvement. We're committed to doing that. In fact, recently we've made some very significant changes to the processes implemented in June of this year, and then the sexual harassment, sexual violence policy was modified in January of 2016 as well. So the period of the audit would be looking back towards several years prior to when the new procedures and improvements are in place. And so one thing that we would ask the committee to consider is whether they would like to see more time for some of those new processes and procedures to unfold and address the audit to include some of that resolution in the meantime, in which case we would happily provide information that the auditor has talked about in the scope, in the interim. That said, if it's the will of the committee that an audit be asked for at this time, we certainly will cooperate fully with anything that the auditor would like to address.
Thank you. So we have several questions. Ms. Baker, Ms. Atkins, Mr. Roth, starting with Assemblymember Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being respectful of our time and trying to make sure that we are even-handed. I appreciate that, especially because I'm usually a pest about that. But in this particular instance, given the nature of the testimony and also the prevalence of this topic, unfortunately, again and again for the last few years, I would be grateful if I could use my question to ask the witness just a little bit more about what your experience with the process was. You had started with one stage of it, briefly, but I would be grateful because I think it sheds light on the appropriateness of the scope of the audit to be able to hear, if you're comfortable, telling us the testimony you didn't get a chance to provide regarding the process so that you experienced.
You're not really told what the process is, to be honest, when you start it. It feels like you're blind throughout the whole process, and once you list your name and decide to list the name of the professor in the situation, life kind of becomes very difficult because you're in the same space as your stalker. And I personally had to leave campus, which meant also leaving being a TA and teaching, and to focus on my exams and also writing the initial complaint. And then you have no choice but to get a lawyer, because what happens next is just more and more years, and it's just it feels like a fight that you'll never win. So you have to go to get a lawyer and then explain everything to the lawyer and then wait for your mediation. It's endless feeling. And I think there needs to be a system that's more concrete and provides correctly for a victim, so that it shouldn't be such a fight for something that, in my opinion, is against the law, even if someone is harassing you on a UC campus.
Thank you. And I think I'm very sorry that you experienced that, and I appreciate the university also acknowledging that was not the way it should have gone. I think it was over 20 or 25 years ago when I was in college. So I sat on one of the first boards that would look, as a student representative, that would look at some of the cases that had begun to be brought forward in a university setting. And even then, I think we had a little bit better of a process. So it is really necessary, I think, this audit. And I really hope that we can look for ways in which to make sure there isn't a process that creates a disincentive for victims to come forward, or overly protects those who might be found through it. Sounds like at one stage of your process, the professor was found to have violated a policy at the least. And because we need to get to that, and we may even learn about this audit for other state agencies and other places where we can go. So thank you for being here, for sticking with it, and for sharing very candidly what your experience is. And I strongly support the audit in the scope that it is currently written, including the time frame. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I concur with Ms. Baker. I appreciate you being here to share this information. I read the background material, and I think this audit is important. I do believe that UC has taken to heart a number of these issues, and so I appreciate the comments. I do think the very specific components of the audit that the author, and thank you, Mr. Nazarian, is asking for is really information we need to understand, because as institutions look forward and change policies and bring something to light, I really think the kinds of questions that are being asked that give us some data will be very helpful to us in the best practices piece. Most of us know that it has taken, it really took young women and a few young men, quite a lot of effort across this country and across different schools to bring this issue to light in a way that had not been done previously. And so I think that while institutions are responding, I think it is still incumbent upon us to really delve into this and kind of get the nature of what's happening so that we can understand it and make sure from the regents to the institutions to this body knows how that we are putting forward a message that it's not acceptable. And so with that, thank you for the time, Mr. Chairman. I will support the audit.
Senator Roth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I'm offended by this case on several different levels, and ma'am, and one of the things that offends me is the apparent consequence to you. So I don't want to get into the legal issues, and obviously we can't get into the settlement negotiations and all that, but I just have a couple questions if you're willing to answer them. Following your complaint, did you want to continue in your PhD program?
My initial complaints to Pamela Thomas and the first I did, yes.
And what was or is the impact to you of not being able to continue your PhD program at a UC institution? I will tell you, I'm not a PhD, but my father was, and my supposition is that it's very difficult to pick up in the middle of a PhD program and move to another institution. I don't know whether that's accurate. Can you enlighten me?
Oh, yeah, I don't think I would be able to now finish my PhD in French now. I'm not saying in the future, but I'm sorry, I'm a little confused by your question. Are you saying like if I had been able to transfer at the time or now? I'm not quite understanding.
Well, I'm just trying to understand what the consequence to you is of the agreement not to pursue study further at a UC institution.
I mean, it's both personally devastating for many reasons. I also went to undergraduate at UC San Diego. It takes, personally, it takes everything from you. And I was this close to beginning to write my PhD, actually. I was very passionate about my subject.
Your dissertation?
My dissertation, yes. And I'm lost in what my job is going to be, what my future is going to be still. And both, personally and professionally, it takes away everything. Because also for a job interview, how can you explain, I just stopped, I'm not allowed to explain, first of all, but I'm not about to say, because of this mediation, I wasn't allowed to continue my PhD, that's why I left. I'm not gonna say that to the person who's interviewing me. It's such a taboo subject anyway, that I feel it just really is hard to move on with your life.
Well, you know, I've been a lawyer for 43 years, and all of it was employment-related work, including, frankly, some representation of the UC in decades and decades ago. And I will say I've never heard of this type of adverse consequence to a complainant. So I will be delighted to support the audit, and I will be looking forward to the audit report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any further questions? Senator Fuller.
Just for the edification of the panel, when you are getting a PhD at UC, which I did, one of the things that is irreplaceable is your advisor. If your advisor dies on you, well, I mean, this is a sad case, but if he dies on you at the time you are going through it, you will never finish that PhD. You will start over from beginning. The classes are about 25 people per class. There are generally about 5 professors that can take PhD students. Some of them take 10 years to get a student through. Sometimes it's 1 or 2 years. So going to the place where you get an advisor, you are probably maybe 3 out of the last 10 classes that come through. And so you are mentally and physically extremely exhausted, and you feel you must do whatever it is to jump through that final hoop and write that dissertation. Not being allowed to go to a UC system anywhere, not just moving from one but to another, is a punishment that I can't even fathom, and I am totally outraged to hear. The library system alone that you start your research in is absolutely necessary and critical to you. So I can't say strongly enough that this process has been totally inappropriate is the best way I can put it. And while we have new processes and we are moving forward, I want to be sure that I know who the university protects. Are there special classes of people that the university protects because they seem more valuable in their value to the university at that time? That's a question I would like to know. Thank you.
All right. Any further questions? Questions or comments from the public? Seeing none. Motion's been made by Senator Roth and seconded by Assemblymember Obernolte. Assemblymember Nazarian, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, thank you very much for everyone's comments and recognition of the importance of the issue. I also do want to say thank you to the UC for stepping up, also being here and giving your testimony, and apologizing firsthand. My constituent speaks not only for herself, but at least 112 other individuals who have been reported between the time of 2013 and 16. And while I do respect and appreciate very much the steps that the UC has taken, as I said before in my opening comments, this isn't something I arrived to easily. I worked with the schools, worked with the president's office. Some incremental change was made in that process, but I hope we're on the same page going forward, that all of those 113 and whoever else that this audit finds are made whole in this process also. It's one thing for a professor to be asked to move on. It's another thing when the victim is not made whole in the process. So with that, I respectfully ask for an aye vote, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nazarian. I just want to make one final comment, which is that I certainly appreciate you, Mr. Nazarian, for working on championing this issue and bringing this audit request forward. I did have some conversations with the University of California, and their concern about there being the subject of a frequent number of audits in recent years. However, I do agree with my colleagues on the committee that this issue is of such a compelling nature that it certainly merits another audit. And so I will be supporting the audit request, and with that, motion's been made and seconded. Ask for a roll call.
Motion on audit number 2017125, Nazarian, relating to the University of California sexual harassment cases. Chair's recommendation is an aye vote. Marisucci?
Aye.
Marisucci, aye. Acosta? Aye. Acosta, aye. Baker? Aye. Baker, aye. Nazarian?
Aye.
Nazarian, aye. Obernolte? Aye. Obernolte, aye. Rubio? Aye. Rubio, aye. Wood? Aye. Wood, aye. Senator Roth?
Aye.
Roth, aye. Atkins? Atkins, aye. Bell? Aye. Bell, aye. Canella? Aye. Canella, aye. Fuller? Aye. Fuller, aye. Lara? Mendoza? Aye. Mendoza, aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we have 3 items on call. If you did not have a chance, why don't we go through each one of the items for that are on call? And
Item 2017120,